Right now, as this plays, words are crossing an ocean. Not through the air, not through a satellite, through a cable thinner than a garden hose, lying on the floor of the Atlantic, 3 miles down, in total darkness. Almost nobody who uses the internet has ever asked what actually keeps it alive at the bottom of the sea. The question sounds technical. It isn't. It's about to become one of the strangest stories in modern infrastructure. Hold on to this. The thing protecting 99% of the world's intercontinental data is not the thing most people assume it is. Act 1. The familiar made strange. Here's the part almost nobody knows. More than 99% of all data that crosses an ocean, every email between continents, every video call to another country, every dollar that moves through international banking, travels through physical cables lying on the seafloor. Not satellites, cables. There are roughly 530 of these cables in active service today, covering over 1.4 million kilometers of ocean floor, enough length to wrap around the Earth more than 30 times. Each one is barely as thick as a soda can, built around a core of glass fiber strands no wider than a human hair, carrying pulses of light at close to the speed of light itself. Most people picture the internet as something weightless. A cloud, a signal, a wireless idea floating above the planet. The truth is the opposite. The internet is one of the most physical things humans have ever built. It is glass and steel and rubber, dragged across ocean trenches, draped over underwater mountains, buried in sand near the coastlines, and left utterly exposed across most of the open sea. And almost no single government and no single company controls all of it. It is a patchwork of competing private infrastructure, stitched together across the most ungoverned territory left on Earth. International water, 3 to 5 kilometers deep. So if it's that exposed, what's actually stopping someone, or something, from simply cutting it? Act 2. The mechanism for decades, there's been a popular answer to that question, and the popular answer is wrong. Ask almost anyone why undersea cables get damaged, and the same word comes up: sharks. It's become internet folklore. Viral clips, tech blog headlines, even cable manufacturers half-jokingly shark-proofing their lines with Kevlar-style wrapping for marketing photos. Here's the actual data. Industry records collected by the International Submarine Cable Protection Committee show that fish bites, a category that technically includes sharks, accounted for roughly 1% of all recorded cable damage up to 2006. Between 2007 and 2014, that number dropped to effectively 0 documented faults caused by biting at all. The shark is not the villain of this story. It never really was. So what is actually breaking the cables that move global banking, global communication, and most of the planet's data? Anchors, fishing nets, ordinary mundane human carelessness. Ship anchors dragging across the seabed and bottom-trawling fishing nets snagging cable lines are responsible for an estimated 65 to 75% of all cable faults recorded worldwide. Not espionage, not predators. A single fishing boat in the wrong place, dropping anchor at the wrong moment, can sever a connection that carries a meaningful share of an entire country's internet traffic. A single dragged anchor has caused more documented damage to the global internet than every shark bite ever recorded combined. The real villain was hiding in a fishing log, not a nature documentary. This is why cable-laying engineers build routes the way they do. Near coastlines where ship traffic is dense and anchors are common, cables are buried beneath the seabed using a plow towed behind specialized vessels, sometimes more than a meter deep into the sediment. Farther out in open ocean where the water itself becomes the obstacle, cables are simply laid bare on the seafloor, relying on depth and remoteness as their only real protection. Engineers have an informal name for that boundary: the line where burial gives way to total exposure, the depth threshold, the point past which the ocean is treated as protection enough on its own. Laying a single cable can take a specialized ship built specifically for the task, more than 2 months at sea, slowly unspooling thousands of kilometers of cable at a pace barely faster than walking, while a robotic plow buries it meter by meter along the continental shelf. There are fewer than 50 of these cable-laying ships in operation worldwide. Even once a cable is resting safely on the seafloor, the signal itself starts dying the moment it leaves the shore. Light traveling through glass fiber weakens gradually over distance. So every 50 to 70 kilometers, engineers install a repeater, a sealed pressure-resistant cylinder sitting directly on the ocean floor, containing a tiny laser amplifier whose only job is to catch the fading pulse of light and boost it back to strength before it dies completely. A single transoceanic cable can contain more than 100 of these repeaters, each one expected to function without maintenance, without inspection, and without failure, for 25 years sitting in pressure that would crush a submarine. There is no technician who visits a repeater. There is no scheduled checkup. Engineers call this design philosophy run-to-failure resilience. Build something so far beyond reach that maintenance becomes physically impossible, then engineer it to simply outlast the need for repair. It mostly works. Mostly. Act 3. The hidden design. Here is where the story stops being about accidents and starts being about decisions nobody outside the industry ever voted on. The 530 cables carrying the modern world's data are not primarily owned by governments. They are increasingly owned, financed, and even physically built by a small handful of private technology companies. Google, Meta, Amazon, and Microsoft together now own or hold financial stakes in a significant share of new transoceanic cable capacity. A shift that happened almost entirely within the last decade, with essentially no public debate and very little media coverage. That ownership shift matters because of something engineers call a cable choke point, a narrow, geographically unavoidable corridor, like the Luzon Strait near Taiwan or the southern Red Sea near Yemen, where a disproportionate number of the world's cables are forced to pass through the exact same few hundred kilometers of water, simply because of the shape of the continents around them. Recall that 99% figure from the opening. Now picture how much of it funnels through a dozen narrow corridors at once. Roughly a dozen of these choke points carry a majority of the planet's intercontinental bandwidth. Disrupting a country's connection to the rest of the world wouldn't require touching a satellite or breaching a server. It would only require a vessel, the right coordinates, and patience. That scenario is no longer theoretical. The Luzon Strait alone carries a large share of the data connecting East Asia to North America, threading directly through waters where naval tension between China and Taiwan has been escalating for years. Taiwanese officials have repeatedly reported cable faults near their coast involving Chinese-linked vessels, faults that officially are always attributed to accidental anchor drag, and unofficially are treated by some defense analysts as a quiet form of pressure that leaves no fingerprints. There's a term that started circulating among maritime security analysts for exactly this kind of incident: plausible accident sabotage. Damage that produces a real strategic effect while remaining just ordinary enough, just explainable enough, that no government can be formally blamed for it. A dragged anchor is either a mistake or a message, and from the outside, the cable itself cannot tell the difference. Act 4. The present cost. In late 2024 and into 2025, multiple cables across the Baltic Sea, connecting Finland, Sweden, Germany, and Lithuania, were severed within weeks of one another. Investigators in several of those countries publicly identified a specific vessel, tracked continuously by satellite, that had dragged its anchor for more than 100 nautical miles, directly along the path of two separate cables in the days before. Both failed. In the Red Sea, cables connecting Europe and Asia were severed amid regional conflict tied to the broader war in the area, rerouting a measurable share of intercontinental traffic and forcing several internet providers to lease emergency satellite capacity at a steep premium for months afterward. Here is the math of what that actually costs. A single transoceanic cable can represent upward of $200,000 to $300,000 per day in lost capacity value while it sits offline. Locating a fault 3 to 5 kilometers underwater, then hauling that section of cable to the surface to physically splice it back together, can take anywhere from several days to several weeks per repair, depending on weather, depth, and ship availability. There are only about 60 cable repair ships in the entire world, serving every ocean on Earth simultaneously. 60 ships protecting a network that underpins, by some financial estimates, more than $10 trillion a day in transactions that depend on it staying online without interruption. So who is actually watching this 1.4 million kilometer system spread across every ocean at once? The honest answer: nobody. Completely. Coast guards monitor their own territorial waters. Cable owners track their own lines through private monitoring centers. No single international body holds full real-time visibility or enforcement authority over the entire network. It has survived less because it was defended, and more because, until very recently, almost nobody had a strong enough reason to attack it. That reason now clearly exists in multiple regions at the same time. NATO responded to the Baltic incidents by launching a dedicated naval patrol mission specifically to monitor cable corridors. The first time in the alliance's history that undersea data infrastructure has been treated as a frontline military concern rather than a civilian engineering matter. If this is the first time hearing how exposed this system actually is, that reaction is the point of this channel. Subscribing means catching next week's breakdown of where that $10 trillion a day actually goes once it leaves these cables. Act 5. The Insight. So what actually keeps internet cables safe at the bottom of the sea? Not armor, not satellites watching for sabotage, not international law, which still treats most of this infrastructure as ungoverned open water with no dedicated enforcement body. What keeps it safe, on most ordinary days, is depth, remoteness, and the simple statistical fact that most ships never sail directly above it. That is not a security system, that is an absence of incentive. And absences of incentive do not last forever, especially once geopolitical tension gives someone a reason to test them. The deeper pattern here isn't really about cables. It's about how much of modern life, banking, cross-border communication, even coordination across electrical grids, quietly depends on physical infrastructure that was designed assuming nobody would ever bother to attack it. The internet feels invisible because the wire was never shown. Once the wire is visible, the next question becomes unavoidable. What else was built on that same quiet assumption? This channel exists to keep finding answers to exactly that question. The hidden physical systems nobody points a camera at. Subscribing is the easiest way to see the next one first. The shark was never the threat. The threat was always that humanity built something the entire planet depends on, then quietly assumed someone else was watching it. Nobody was formally assigned to watch it. Every day, the system simply continued, on the hope that nobody would try. Somewhere in the Pacific tonight, a repair ship is steaming toward coordinates a few hundred kilometers off a coastline. Most passengers on it have never set foot on, carrying a few kilometers of replacement cable, a crew of specialists, and the quiet, unspoken understanding that the work they do will never make the news unless something has already gone wrong.